Chapter 6.5 Exotic Pets. Hidden Chapter, August 5th, 21. It was a warm Californian night with silence dominating the surroundings, surely an unusual occurrence. This silence, however, was hardly a product of barren streets, as two men were found walking down the block. These two men were not of a normative manner, so to say. As you see, these two gentlemen had just recently escaped their supervision and were now presiding in a state of great joy as a result. What kind of supervision? One might just ask. Well, they certainly weren't criminals, not conventional ones at least, and they certainly were not children, though some might undeniably mistake them for just that. Since the two exhibited childlike qualities often, the men were by the names of Paul and Eric, and they were two borderline, clinically retarded males in their mid-to-30s, having just recently fled the nearby facility where they were being contained. The men were rather short and rather stocky, but one should not underestimate their strength because of this, as they possessed quite a considerable amount of it. The pair was wearing the usual garments you would expect, considering the location they have just escaped from, with white tops, white pants, and yes, white shoes. While under a spell of elation, the two walked the streets aimlessly, and perhaps even foolishly, yet this soon would change. Paul and Eric had now spotted something they have deemed rather interesting. It was a couple, a male and a female in their early 20s from the looks of it. The young lovers shared quite the bond, while an aura of happiness shrouded them whole as the duo conquered the arid, shadow-covered road. Laughing and talking, the two were in the most romantic of all manners, a sweet scene for some, though perhaps not for Paul and Eric. While jubilated, the couple did not notice the duo of escapees fixating on them and continued their walk to what was surely their domicile. Paul and Eric followed them, remaining as furtive and silent as the night itself, and after a certain time spent walking with the one duo shadowing the other, the destination was finally reached. A rather isolated location this was. A house, most certainly, not one belonging to the couple, but rather belonging to the parents of one of the lovebirds. The couple advanced towards the main door and proceeded to open it, and it was during this time that Paul and Eric spotted their opportunity and made their move. They rushed the young man and woman once the door was fully ajar. Paul was the first to go in, and he took it upon himself to overpower the unsuspecting male. This feat was quite simple for Paul due to the abnormal strength him and his partner possessed. With the boyfriend now down on the ground, Paul continued the assault as he hammered his head with his fist until the man was no longer conscious. The woman tried screaming but was swiftly interrupted by Eric, who had an even easier time overpowering the young lady. The lovers' duo had now both found themselves on the ground, incapacitated. Luckily for the two callous intruders, not another soul was found inside the house at this time of the night. Paul and Eric dragged the slumber-enamoured pair to the garage of this luxurious house. High-quality paintings, prime vases, and premier rugs were located throughout this two-story domicile. The lighting was non-existent, as the couple had little time to switch on any lights before the attack on them commenced. Many pictures of the family were hung on the wall as Paul and Eric passed them, paying no heed while intently striding towards their destination. The house belonged to the family of the woman, as she was very much present in those pictures, and while smiling she was then in those photographs. Screaming, she was now inside the garage. "Help! Someone, please help!" the young lady cried out in desperation, crying amidst the effort of freeing herself from bondage shortly after suddenly regaining consciousness unexpectedly. The young man was now beginning to do the same, yet luck was most certainly not on their side, as they had both abruptly found themselves bound with rope, while in separate chairs upon egressing the bewitching state of slumber. "Help!" she yelled once more, unwilling to concede. "I don't think anyone can hear you," Eric responded in a collected tone, scanning the restrained and distressed lady. "The other one is coming to as well." He then added with the same composure present once again after directing his vision towards the man. "I have the gags right here and ready." Paul matched the calm tone of his friend, stretching the two hefty leather straps and bringing them closer to the unfortunate pair. Shortly after the distance was vanquished, Paul proceeded to authoritatively gag the couple. "Why are you doing this?" The man suddenly burst out moments before being silenced by the gag while struggling aggressively inside the chair. Neither one of the intruders elected to provide an answer, as Paul had now finished securing the duo's mouths. Both the young man and the woman attempted to resume speaking while gagged, but needless to say, this proved to be a rather fruitless effort. Paul and Eric stood there, towering over the star-crossed couple, antagonistically gazing them down in silence. Yet soon one of the invaders would find himself overrun by a certain emotion of much potency. "Disgusting! Fucking a nigger is like fucking an animal," Eric suddenly proclaimed with genuine revulsion guiding him, elevating his voice and overwhelming his facial acreage. Paul, while not necessarily sharing the sentiment of his dear friend, laughed at this remark regardless. "That's a good one, Eric, but maybe we can fix that," Paul appended with his voice still infected with the vibe of chuckling as he advanced on to search around the garage. After a short interval of scavenging around the spacious locale, he came back to the chairs which the duo had occupied with a portable metal grinder firmly in his grasp. "Let's see if we can clean that skin of yours," Paul articulated solemnly, chuckling to himself. Eric gazed upon the terrified couple, grinning fiendishly as he knew all too well what was about to commence. Muffled screams of the man now dominated the garage with whimpering of the young woman intertwined, producing quite the cacophony of suffering. Paul was very meticulous in his method, much like a surgeon would be while operating on a patient, and while this procedure was not as protracted as an operation, it surely felt that way to the unfortunate man. Paul buffered body part after body part, with the man's skin standing no chance against the metal tip of the industrial tool, implacably tarnishing and shredding layer after layer of the unlucky one's dermis. Deeper and deeper, faster and faster, until suddenly the clamour was no longer, and the machine had now been turned off. "I don't think it is working," Paul said, remaining serious, yet with the colour of confusion now added to the painting of his face. "His skin is still wrong. It's still dirty, Eric," he swiftly added, glancing at his comrade. "I have another idea," Eric stated with reassurance while looking in the corner of the garage. The man then walked over to the place he was just recently scrutinizing and picked out a can of white paint and a brush. He then made his way back to his loyal friend and the lucky couple. "Let's see if this works," Eric formulated in the midst of opening up the can and dipping the brush inside. Once this act was done, Eric painted the man white. He painted over his open wounds and closed skin alike unconcernedly. The combination of red blood and white paint created quite the vivid contrast and provided quite the enjoyment to the two intruders as their vision had become glued to the eventuation in front of them. "Much better. He is now respectable," Eric said while laughing and admiring his work, having encased a portion of the man's body in the milky tone. "Yes, but there is only one problem," Paul spoke, having been encased in disappointment himself. "What is it, Paul?" Eric responded with swiftness and genuine concern as he gazed upon his partner in crime. "He's dead," Paul concluded, pointing the finger at the recently deceased. This sentiment was very much true, as the young man had died due to blood loss while in the midst of the artistic expression. The duo of Paul and Eric were so entranced with their little project that neither one had noticed this when it first happened. "That's unfortunate," said Eric, dejected, while redirecting his eyes towards the woman. "What do we do with her?" The man then inquired as he scanned her intensely. "Rape her?" Paul answered almost instantaneously, having now also shifted his gaze into the remaining survivor. "No, that's disgusting. She has been degraded and debased. She is not worthy anymore." Eric answered Paul's question with repugnance overwhelming him. "With this?" Paul asked the follow-up question as he reached for and acquired a trowel which was located on top of a wheeled tool cabinet near where the man was standing. Eric remained silent and instead just looked back at his friend and smiled devilishly. Both men then turned their head towards the woman and progressed to perform an operation of sorts. Once the procedure was finished, Paul and Eric egressed the garage, turned off the lights and left the house. The couple's lifeless bodies were left laying inside the garage, mere meters from one another, derided, mutilated, and humiliated. August 5th, 23:30. It's getting late, and I am getting tired. Thinking about going to bed now. A drained male voice spoke from within the confines of a capacious and lavish living room. "Don't forget to turn on the alarm before you go to bed, honey." A female had now entered the conversation as she spoke lovingly back to the man. This was an exchange between a husband and his wife. "I still haven't gotten around to getting it fixed. I will call the technicians tomorrow, Sarah. I am sorry. It just slipped my mind." The man now spoke while rising to his feet with not only an exhausted tone, but an apologetic one as well. "Well, it is okay, Stephen. I am sure nothing bad will happen anyway. I will remind you tomorrow anyway, just in case, you know," the woman said from the kitchen with a playful tone. "I am going to bed now, Sarah. You going to join me?" Stephen asked, starting to make his way to the kitchen, yawning multiple times on the way there. "Not yet," the woman responded firmly, totally engrossed in her work. "I just need to finish some work-related stuff here. It won't take long, though. You don't have to worry." Sarah then added with a smile on her face, as the man had now become visible once he made his entrance into the parameters of the kitchen, whilst still striding towards his beloved. "Good night, then," Stephen caringly said, and then kissed his wife on the forehead before proceeding out of the kitchen and up the stairs towards the bedroom. "Good night." The wife responded concisely, yet the tender overtone was oh so present. The house was one of a considerable size, with most of the lights completely off, with the only exception being the kitchen. A rather large yard was located behind this construction, with only sparse fencing accompanying it. 3 people lived inside this palatial house. However, 5 people were present on the premises on this night. The 2 unaccounted for were none other than Paul and Eric. The duo was now heading towards the balcony of the magnificent construct with a sliding door in their sight. Once the 2 approached this very door, Lady Luck seemed to have shined their blessing upon them, as when the pair attempted the door, it was indeed unlocked. Paul and Eric now found themselves inside the house. The wife of the home was the only one located on the ground floor, and Paul and Eric were very much aware of just this fact. The 2 made their way towards the kitchen, sneaking around like most decorated thieves. The duo was truly cunning as they neared the woman. The wife Sarah was completely unaware, enchanted by her work in totality. She paid dearly for this. Eric grabbed a meat mallet that was left on the table in the kitchen and with one seamless motion knocked the wife out cold. The woman's body fell on the floor, producing quite the reverberation. However, this would go unnoticed by the remainder of the family, as they were most certainly asleep by this time of the night. Paul embraced the woman and started to relocate her into the living room, after which he would head to the garage to grab all that was needed for the future performance. Eric, however, was left with another task. This task being capturing the remainder of the family, of course, as they surely could not miss the upcoming spectacle. Clandestine as always, Eric located the master bedroom with the man inside, soundly asleep. One hit after another with the same mallet, the man was no longer asleep and had now in fact become unconscious. Eric utilized his Herculean strength yet again to transfer the husband to the living room where he could join his now bound wife. All was not ready, however, as one more member of the family was still not present. This was a young girl, not even a teen, and she was sleeping in her room on the second floor, undisturbed by the minimal commotion that had been taking place. Paul took it upon himself to gather her, and so he did. The man violently entered the room where the child was peacefully sleeping and captured her in the same manner as the entrance. He would then bring the panicking girl downstairs, where she also would be reunited with her parents. The screams of the young child awakened both of the parents from their mallet-induced trance. Though now fully revived once more, the two parents could not speak as gags were already firmly placed inside their mouths. The girl had given it a commendable effort, but the crying did in fact stop, and this provided the opportunity for the two guests to start an exchange. "Nice house," said Paul earnestly while scrutinizing the living room carefully. "Do you like living here?" He continued with his vision still reserved for his surroundings. "I think it's going to be hard for them to answer, Paul. We gagged them, remember?" Eric stated while slightly disconcerted and confused even. "Maybe I wasn't talking to them," Paul answered his friend in a mocking fashion. "Maybe I was talking to the little one here," the man then added, grabbing the little girl and bringing her closer to Eric, having finished his inspection of the living room. "So, do you like living here?" He was now clearly asking the little girl in a soft and inviting voice, staring directly at her throughout his inquiry. The child, submerged entirely by the waters of dread, remained silent, opting to cry ever so slightly instead. "I think you scared her." Eric continued to speak in a somewhat defeated tone, having casted a look of grand disappointment onto his compadre. "Well, maybe a little show with her parents as the main participants will cheer her up," Paul answered with confidence deep within his voice. "What do you think, little one?" he inquired of the child while once again staring directly at her. Yet again, the final product was the same, with the little girl refusing to respond to the insensitive pair. Visible frustration had now started to veil Paul. Eric noticed this immediately and interceded. Maybe the parents want to see a show with the kid as the main participant instead? After all, they are already in chairs. Eric spoke, reinvigorated and attempting to infect his friend with the same energy. "I always thought I could be an entertainer," Eric stated, nearing the girl methodically. Once he was within reach, Eric relieved the young child from Paul's embrace, guided her closer to himself, and then turned the little one towards her parents. All was now ready for the final act. Suddenly, Eric snapped the child's neck effortlessly, as the girl was rather tiny, not to mention the brawn of the man who had committed the unspeakable. At this moment, one would be forgiven for thinking that the gag was never present at all, as the scream that the wife of the family had let out was one as loud and unsettling as what just recently took place. The father of the family was conquered by the forces of devastation, much like his wife, as he sat restrained in his chair, completely helpless, before starting to sob uncontrollably. "Why are they crying?" Eric inquired. his voice rendered with perplexity while looking at his confidant. The show didn't even start yet. After saying just this, he picked up the lifeless corpse of the young girl and proceeded to manipulate it like a puppet, even going as far as to mimic her voice to his best ability. In a much higher pitch tone,
Eric began speaking once more to the broken parents.
"What's wrong, Mommy and Daddy? Don't you two love me anymore?" The man started to laugh resoundingly shortly after he delivered his line, with his dear friend Paul joining in a near instant. Whilst the two were blanketed by the episode of enrapturing hysterics, Eric tossed the uninhabited body of the little child towards the tied-up parents. The mother shook violently in her chair, trying her best to escape, but to no avail. The man screamed as loud as he could through the gag, while attempting to free himself, much like his wife, but much like his wife, his efforts were also ineffectual. "That was great. That was funny. I always knew you had it in you." Paul spoke to Eric in a congratulatory tone. "You should have been an entertainer, Eric," he then added, furthering the praise for his wickedly creative companion. "Well, maybe it is never too late to become one, huh?" Eric responded as short chuckles followed his remark. "What do we do with these two, Mr. Showman?" Paul asked with sarcasm and great anticipation in his voice, gazing down the couple. "What's a show without fireworks, am I right?" Eric satisfied his friend's curiosity as he started to make his way back inside the garage. After a certain time spent looking around in this sizable site, Eric located a gas can and a lighter, and then swiftly returned to reunite with his associate and the audience for yet another performance. The final performance. "Ah, yes, the fireworks," Paul said in an excited tone, much like a child would. Paul and Eric removed anything and everything that was highly flammable from the vicinity, doused the audience in gasoline, and lit up the fireworks. The two men stood stationary, almost paralyzed, captivated by the display that evinced in front of their eyes. The two were visibly proud of the spectacle they have put on, and needless to say, very much entertained by it. Screams of unimaginable anguish resonated throughout the living room, but soon enough all was quiet again, as the fire consumed the couple whole. The sadistic pair then exited the stage, and all that was left were 3 corpses and the smell of burnt flesh. August 6th, 2:30. A road entirely enveloped in darkness, with only 2 men walking down it. You might have guessed just who those 2 were. Paul and Eric traversed this desolate thoroughfare, and much like prior, silence once again encompassed them both. The silence would soon be broken, however, as quite the unanticipated occurrence eventuated. On this seemingly abandoned road, a car was now nearing the strolling duo, and as the vehicle got closer, it reduced in speed significantly. And soon the mysterious automobile would match the pace of the walkers exactly. Paul and Eric had no other choice but to start conversing once more. "Is it the cops, you think?" Paul asked, confused, carefully examining what little of the vehicle could be observed. "First, don't know. I don't think so," Eric responded, uncertain. Suddenly the car forcefully bolted ahead and eventually pulled up in front of the duo, blocking the path in its entirety. This was a beautiful white sports car, a McLaren even. The night was quite warm, yet Paul and Eric found themselves frozen in one place, anxiously anticipating what's to come. This wait was rather extensive, as the automobile remained inert, with its headlights bathing the pair of men with intensity. Finally, the car door was heard opening, and with it came out a man. Before the grand reveal of the man, however, a question resounded. "Just what are you 2 fine gentlemen up to, I wonder?" The man spoke in a deep and menacing voice as he stood near the driver's door of the vehicle. "Can we help you?" Paul answered a question with another question and a tone of vexation. "I have a feeling it is I who can help you, actually." The man responded in a playful voice as he started to walk towards the duo, and with it into the headlights of his car. Once the light had fully embraced the unanticipated male, it was revealed to be none other than X. Paul and Eric remained coated by quietude whilst looking at one another with expressions of confusion plastered across both of their faces. X the seconds took the opportunity and continued to speak. "That blood on your white attire is what now?" The artiphenoid took a slight reprieve to smirk. "You boys trying to make a fashion statement?" Exacan spoke with a heavy spice of jest, clearly amused by himself and truly eager as a result of this unforeseen meeting. The two men once again continued to stay silent. However, the expression of confusion was one no more, as it was now replaced by blatant concern. During this one-way traffic of a conversation, and while under the blanket of night, Eric started to maneuver towards the creation, but more specifically to a position behind him in order to neutralize this newly manifested problem of theirs. Xians was none the wiser. As you see, he had always been the least aware out of all of his siblings and was entirely consumed by the process of conversation. He kept the exchange alive. "You know, something tells me that the cops are already on their way. I can hear the sirens right now, in fact," the artiphenoid stated, carrying a heavy dose of caution within his words, whilst entirely truthful, as this was very much the case. In the great distance, police sirens roaringly blared. "What makes you think it's for us?" Finally, Paul shattered the silence and responded with fragility in his tone, slowly pointing his head towards the location of the resonance. "Call it woman's intuition." Extens spoke in full jest once again, chuckling to himself shortly after the initial comment. Paul, however, was not quite as appreciative of the artiphenoid's remark and remained not only speechless but expressionless as well. Mikkolo continued, "You boys like getting annulled?" Terse and straight to the point the man was. "Because I have a feeling that is what awaits you two in your future inside of a prison cell." Loaded fully with the ammunition of threat, Sexa started to laugh shortly after his remark, but was quickly interrupted by Eric, who had now snuck his way behind the creation. And within reaching distance, Eric interrupted Exvasadon, not with a sentiment of his own, however. As the man had acquired a hammer from one of the houses the two had just recently visited and utilized this tool in a more creative way than originally intended. Eric swung the hammer as hard as he humanly could and bashed Extand over the head. The artificial creation dropped like a sack of potatoes. A fatal blow this was, seemingly. "Well done," Paul stated with great relief. With their new acquaintance no longer a thorn, the duo continued to walk down the path, yet this stride didn't last long as the two had no choice but to react to something rather unforeseen. "Good arm you got there. You played baseball or something?" Exva spoke, full of himself once again, while standing upright on both feet, as if nothing had ever happened. "Did you miss?" Paul inquired of Eric with overwhelming confusion rearing its ugly head. "No, I hit him over the head as hard as I could," Eric answered while overflowing with puzzlement himself, staring down the man who should no longer have been occupying the realm of the living. "I'll tell you what, Barry Bonds, you and your friend here." Exthayan was now speaking with fire while using another source of fire to light up a cigarette. "If you come with me, then you won't have to worry about playing any sex games in prison," he stated, shaking the match he used for the cigarette in order to extinguish the flame. "If you don't, then I might just turn you in myself." He then added, exhaling quite the considerable dose of smoke from within himself, "You know, always wanted some pets." XI continued leisurely. VI had that stupid dog back at the facility, so why shouldn't I have some dogs of my own? The Artiphenoid took a reprieve to shake off the cigarette residue. So, what you say, boys? He concluded, staring at the pair determinedly. Beguiled, Paul and Eric stood there, contemplating over this abstract proposition while the sirens neared with every passing moment of deliberation. After a significant interval of time, the duo had both looked at one another and finally began to speak themselves. We agree. Paul and Eric responded in synchrony with, chains of concession now firmly secured. What is your name? What do we call you? Eric was now the only one speaking as he inquired with genuine interest. It rhymes with plaster. Ixain answered in his typical playful tone, producing a self-approbatory smile shortly after. Certainly, mister. Both men stated in unison once more. I am afraid you're going to have to try again, boys, Ixain said while chuckling, narcissism remaining as the foundation for his glee. After a brief moment of silence, the barbarous duo spoke in harmony for the third time on this pleasant and tranquil Californian night. Certainly, master.